The phrase, "one person, one vote," is one of the most famous principles in American democracy. Most people assume it came from a fight over congressional districts or presidential elections. It didn't. It was invented because of a single state that built a voting system so backwards that one rural vote was worth 10 times an urban vote. That state was Georgia. And the voting system was only the second time Georgia tried to work the opposite of the rest of America. The first time was even more surprising, and it started with a ban on slavery. In the 1730s, General James Oglethorpe and a board of trustees designed Georgia as something no other British colony had ever attempted: a social experiment. The plan was to resettle Britain's worthy poor as small independent farmers. Not plantation owners, not landed gentry. Small farmers working modest plots with their own hands. The colony's motto was not for self, but for others. Oglethorpe laid out Savannah itself as a physical blueprint of the egalitarian ideal, a grid of open squares and garden lots, each settler receiving 50 acres. Enough to sustain a family, but not enough to build an empire. Rum was restricted. Land could not be sold or consolidated. Slavery was banned outright. Large land holdings were prohibited. Oglethorpe argued that allowing slaves would violate the very principles the colony was founded on, calling it an offense against both the gospel and English law. In 1735, Parliament formally outlawed slavery in Georgia, making it the only British American colony to prohibit black slavery as a matter of official public policy. Think about where Georgia sits on the map. It is wedged between South Carolina to the north, already one of the most brutal slave economies in the Western Hemisphere, and Spanish Florida to the south. The trustees pitched their experiment to the House of Commons as both a moral project and a military necessity. Enslaved people in South Carolina could flee south to Spanish territory, where the Spanish crown offered them freedom in exchange for military service. A colony of armed free farmers would hold the line against that threat. A colony of planters dependent on enslaved labor would be a security liability. A border full of people with every reason to run. So Georgia was deliberately designed to be the anti-plantation colony. Independent farmers, no slavery, no concentrated wealth. In the heart of the slave-holding South, one colony was built to work the opposite of every neighbor surrounding it. It was idealistic. It was strategic. And it lasted about 15 years. South Carolina planters saw opportunity where Oglethorpe saw idealism. They smuggled enslaved Africans across the Savannah River into Georgia, building an underground supply line that made the ban nearly impossible to enforce. Georgia settlers began petitioning the trustees, arguing they could not compete with slave labor colonies pressing in on every side. The economic contrast was brutal. Just across the river in South Carolina, rice planters were building some of the largest fortunes in British America, living in Charleston townhouses, importing European furniture, shipping thousands of barrels of rice to London each year. Georgia's small farmers, working their own fields in the same heat and humidity, could barely feed themselves. They cleared the same swampy lowlands, fought the same insects, endured the same subtropical summers, but without enslaved labor, their output was a fraction of what their neighbors produced. The pressure built for years. Economic complaints, illegal importation, political lobbying from settlers who wanted the same system their neighbors had. Petitions grew angrier. Some colonists simply left, crossing back into South Carolina where the rules were different. By 1750, barely 15 years after the ban, the trustees caved. Parliament legalized slavery in Georgia. Almost immediately, the colony became the very plantation society it had been designed to prevent. Rice and indigo plantations spread across the coastal lowlands. Enslaved populations surged. Within a generation, Georgia's demographics looked indistinguishable from South Carolina's. The social experiment collapsed not because the idea was flawed in isolation, but because geography made it almost impossible. Georgia was surrounded by an economic system so powerful that resisting it required more political will than any colonial board could sustain. The reversal didn't just end one experiment. It helped entrench the idea that the plantation model was economically and politically unavoidable in the Lower South. Georgia's brief anti-slavery window slammed shut, and the Deep South trajectory it followed through the cotton boom, through secession, through the Civil War, all of it locked into place in that 15-year collapse. The colony built to be the opposite of the slave-holding South became its fullest expression. The slavery reversal was Georgia's first experiment in running opposite to the rest of America. But after the Civil War, Georgia built another system that worked backwards, and this one was even more extreme. It didn't just affect Georgia, it forced the entire country to redefine what democracy means. And it started with something that sounds completely harmless: drawing county lines. After independence, Georgia's leaders began slicing the state into counties. It started with just 8 in 1777. But over the next century and a half, the number kept climbing, subdividing, splitting, carving new boundaries out of old ones, until Georgia reached 161 counties by 1931. A 1945 constitutional amendment capped the number at 159 after 2 bankrupt counties were absorbed into Fulton. Many of these counties had been drawn so that a citizen could ride a horse to the county seat and back in a single day. That logic made sense in the 1800s. Roads were dirt, travel was slow, government needed to be close enough to reach. But that 19th century logic is still governing 21st century Georgia. The counties weren't just about convenience. In 1917, Georgia created something called the county unit system, essentially a statewide electoral college for party primaries. Every county received a block of unit votes regardless of population. In a one-party Democratic South, winning the primary was winning the election. There was no competitive general election. The primary was the whole game, and the county unit system decided who won. The formula gave small rural counties vastly outsized power. By the mid-20th century, rural areas with roughly 1/3 of Georgia's population controlled a majority of county unit votes. The math was staggering. Fulton County, home to Atlanta, holding over 14% of the state's population, received just 6 of 410 total unit votes. That works out to barely 1.5% of the voting power for a county that held more than 1 in 7 Georgians. Meanwhile, tiny Eccles County, with 1,876 residents, just 0.05% of the state's population, controlled a full unit vote worth nearly 0.5% of the total. Run those numbers, and the conclusion is jarring. 1 vote cast in Eccles County carried roughly the same weight as 10 votes cast in Atlanta. Georgia had built an internal electoral college that inverted Democratic representation. No other state had anything like it. The system didn't just tilt power toward rural areas. It made urban voters functionally irrelevant in statewide primaries. Atlanta could grow, industrialize, attract hundreds of thousands of new residents, and none of that growth translated into proportional political power. The machine was designed to ensure that the map mattered more than the people on it. And for decades, it worked exactly as designed. Candidates for governor didn't campaign in Atlanta. They campaigned in the countryside, courting county bosses who could deliver blocks of unit votes. A handful of rural power brokers wielded more influence over statewide elections than the entire population of Georgia's largest city. Urban issues, public transit, housing, industrial regulation barely registered in statewide primaries because the voters who cared about them had been mathematically silenced. The system didn't just distort elections, it distorted policy, investment in the direction of the state itself for nearly half a century. A Fulton County voter named James Sanders decided he'd had enough. He challenged the county unit system in court, and the case climbed all the way to the United States Supreme Court. On March 18, 1963, the justices struck down Georgia's system in Gray v. Sanders. Justice William O. Douglas wrote that the American conception of political equality can mean only one thing: one person, one vote. That phrase. The one most people assume came from a fight over congressional apportionment, or maybe a presidential election dispute. It was actually invented to describe how broken Georgia's county unit system was. The Supreme Court didn't borrow the phrase from somewhere else and apply it to Georgia. They coined it because of Georgia. The state's uniquely backward system became the negative example that forced every state in America to justify how it weighted votes. Chief Justice Earl Warren later said that reapportionment decisions like Gray were among the most important of his entire tenure, more consequential in his view than even the school desegregation cases. That is an extraordinary claim from the man who presided over Brown versus Board of Education. But Warren's reasoning was straightforward. Reapportionment restructured political power itself. If votes aren't equal, then every other right that flows from voting is built on a crooked foundation. Georgia's county unit system became a cornerstone of modern reapportionment law, influencing every redistricting fight that followed. The state that had been built to work the opposite of democratic equality became the reason the rules of democracy changed for everyone. One state's broken machine forced the entire country to recalibrate. So the county unit system was struck down in 1963. The machine that made one rural vote worth 10 city votes was dismantled. But here is the strange part. The 159 counties it was built on are still there. Every single one. And they are still shaping Georgia in ways that most people don't realize. Georgia is the 8th largest state by population, but it has more counties than every state in America except Texas. And Texas is physically 4 times larger. Each of Georgia's 159 counties still funds its own courts, its own elections, its own law enforcement, and its own schools. 7 counties are still governed by a single elected commissioner who holds both legislative and executive authority in one person, a county-level power structure almost no other state even allows, let alone still practices. After the 2020 census, the paradox sharpened. Georgia grew by more than 1 million people in a single decade, one of the fastest growing states in the country. But 67 of its 159 counties, nearly half, actually lost population during the same period. Tiny counties like Taliaferro, with around 1,600 residents, still maintain full county governments. A courthouse, elected officials, administrative staff. All the overhead of self-governance supported by a tax base smaller than many suburban neighborhoods. The infrastructure that was originally built to amplify rural political power is now draining the very communities it was supposed to serve. Counties that once punched above their weight in statewide elections now struggle to keep their roads paved and their schools open. The map drawn for horseback travel and political control has become a fiscal trap. Small counties cannot generate enough revenue to fund modern services, but they cannot merge either, because every attempt at consolidation runs into the same wall. Some county governments spend more on administration than they collect in local taxes, surviving only on state transfers and federal grants. A county with 1,600 people still needs a sheriff, a clerk of court, a tax commissioner, election infrastructure, and road maintenance. The per capita cost of running government in these tiny counties dwarfs what larger counties spend. But the services they deliver are often worse because there simply is not enough money to go around. The irony cuts deep. The counties that were originally drawn to bring government closer to the people now struggle to provide the most basic functions of government at all. There are periodic proposals to consolidate Georgia's counties, merge the tiny ones, combine services, share administrative costs, save money. On paper, the logic is overwhelming. Some of these counties have fewer residents than a single apartment complex in Atlanta. But every time a consolidation proposal surfaces, it runs into fierce grassroots resistance. People don't want to lose their county seat. They don't want to lose their courthouse, the building where their grandparents got married, where their property deeds are filed, where Friday night high school football rivalries are anchored to a county name painted on the water tower. They don't want their identity absorbed into a neighbor's name on a map. In rural Georgia, the county is not just an administrative unit. It is the organizing principle of community life, where you vote, where you go to court, where your kids play sports, where your family is buried. The same hyper-local culture that made the county unit system possible in the first place, the deep attachment to my county as the center of political and social life, now makes it nearly impossible to undo the map that system left behind. The culture that built the machine is now protecting the wreckage, and so Georgia keeps living inside the consequences of structures designed to work opposite to how America is supposed to function. The slavery ban collapsed, but the plantation economy it was built to prevent defined the state for the next 2 centuries. The county unit system was struck down, but the 159 counties that powered it remain, too entrenched to remove, too small to sustain, too deeply woven into local identity to consolidate. Georgia was designed as the opposite of every other colony, a place without slavery, without plantations, without concentrated wealth. That design lasted 15 years before collapsing into the very thing it was built to prevent. Then Georgia built a voting system that was the opposite of democratic equality, where one rural vote carried the weight of 10 urban votes and a county of 1,876 people held more per capita power than a city of hundreds of thousands. That system lasted until the Supreme Court had to invent a new phrase to kill it. And the county map that powered that system is still there. 159 pieces of a machine that no longer runs but cannot be taken apart. Georgia didn't just accidentally end up working backwards. It was designed to twice. And both times the design collapsed, but the wreckage stayed. Other states drift into contradiction gradually. Georgia was built for it. The opposite state keeps constructing systems that the rest of America eventually has to tear down. And the scars of those systems are still visible on every map of Georgia today. If you want to see how another state's geography locked in a pattern that never reversed, watch the video on screen now. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the channel where maps explain what textbooks leave out. Thanks for watching.